In today's video, we'll be discussing the pressure volume curve for cardiac cycle. Then we'll move on to afterload, preload, and ionotropy. So here we are. This is pressure. This is volume. Okay, so right here, this first dot, this is when we're looking at the left ventricle. Blood's coming in from the pulmonary veins. It's filling up the atrium. Mitral valve opens, allowing blood to flow in, going all the way up to 120 milliliters. Once we get reached 120 milliliters, the mitral valve closes, leading into a stage of isovolumeric contraction. You see how the pressure is rising immensely? It's because the ventricles are contracting without expelling any blood. Then we'll reach this. The pressure will reach a certain point in which it will release or open the aortic semilunar valve, really encouraging the ejection phase of blood into the aorta. Once the pressure drops, we will enter a phase. Well, the valve closes, the semilunar aortic valve closes, and we'll enter a period of isovolumeric relaxation. Okay? And then we need to know that this side of the line is our EDV. This side of the line is the ESV. So this in the middle would be our SV, our stroke volume, because stroke volume equals ED it's V minus ESV. Oh my goodness. Okay. Now we're going to move on to different things. We're going to move on to preload. So preload, and right here it says, is the amount of stretch in the heart muscles before they contract. So, basically, if we increase preload, I think the biggest thing to know about preload and just kind of the effects is that if we increase preload, then our SV is going to increase immensely, right? So if SV goes up, and remember, I don't know if you guys know, cardiac output equals SV times heart rate. So if our SV goes up, that means cardiac output will also go up. Now, in order to compensate that, to bring it down, our heart rate could go down to bring cardiac output down. But if SV goes down, that means cardiac output also goes down. Okay? Just kind of there. Afterload. Okay, afterload is the force in which the heart has to pump to expel blood towards the vasculature. So basically, increasing preload means increasing pressure. Or afterload, I mean, sorry. I don't know if it makes sense, but remember, if we were talking, in order to open up the semilunar aortic valve, there needs to be a certain amount of pressure for it to open. And on the other side, that valve opening is dependent on the pressure in the aorta. If the pressure in the aorta is less, then that valve can open. But if not, then we're going to need more pressure in the ventricles to overcome that pressure. So basically, the red line is an increase. The red is an increase in afterload. And the green is a decrease. Now, an increase in afterload, again, is a decrease in stroke volume. A decrease in stroke volume will ultimately lead to a decrease in cardiac output. Okay, that's kind of all you really know. The ionotropy, which is this line, we're going to talk about that in just a second. So here's ionotropy. This is the force of contraction of the heart. It's independent of preload and afterload. Okay, so basically, let's see. Ionotropy, yeah, again, it's the force of contraction. So if we have a decrease or less calcium, that means we're going to have less contractile force. That's going to decrease our ionotropy. Decreasing our ionotropy, again, is going to decrease our SV. Decreasing SV is going to decrease cardiac output. However, if we have more calcium, say that's going to increase our increase SV, increase cardiac output. Okay, it's kind of just a rough overview on that. Now we're going to talk about baroreceptors, and so you spell it. Oh, I guess it's right there, but B-A-R-O, baroreceptors. These are receptors in the carotid sinus and the aortic arch, as seen here, that respond to stretch. And this is a feedback loop system, right, that helps us keep in normal range. So basically what happens if there is a response to stretch, if the aorta stretches, it's going to send a signal through the baroreceptors saying that to the brain, which will then eventually go to the brain through an afferent pathway, saying, hey, aorta stretching. If the aorta if the baroreceptors are stretching, that means there is an increase in blood pressure. Okay, I'm gonna walk you through. If there's an increase in blood pressure, right, the baroreceptors are going to fire more, which would then stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. Stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system will drop heart rate, which will honestly ultimately, dropping heart rate decreases blood pressure and decreases contractility. Now, vice versa, if there was a lower blood pressure, that means the baroreceptors would fire less, actually stimulating the sympathetic nervous system, increasing everything. How? That's kind of a super brief overview of baroreceptors, and this integrates with our mean arterial pressure in these equations here. So this is called, a map is called our mean arterial pressure, and that equals cardiac output times peripheral resistance. Okay, and now the other equation that we need to take into consideration is cardiac output, and that's stroke volume times heart rate. We went about that previously, but the biggest things that are influencing our MAP, again, is our ultimately is end-of-diastolic volume and the systolic volume, which affects our SV, stroke volume. If stroke volume is inhibited or changed, that'll affect cardiac output. Again, if heart rate increases or decreases via the autonomic nervous system, that will change cardiac output. If we change cardiac output, we'll change MAP. And again, if peripheral resistance, so contractility, contraction, or dilation, either from the sympathetic or parasympathetic, that will also change how the mean arterial pressure responds. we're going to end off this video with the capillary fluid exchange. I'm just going to go through a couple of, I guess, or basically, here, I'll just highlight these. Basically, just going to talk about these terms here. It's very important. So we'll first start off with, this is a capillary, and over here is an artery. Well, arterial, and it's going to a capillary. Okay, right here we have a sphincter called the precapillary sphincter and a smooth muscle. Inside the capillary we have hydrostatic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure is around 30. Okay, and as well inside this we have what's called blood colloid proteins. Blood colloid proteins are basically they can't cross the membrane, okay? They're too big to cross, and so they stay inside the capillary. Because they stay inside the capillary, they're going to increase the solute concentration. Increasing solute concentration means that it's going to bring water in, fluids in. Now the hydrostatic pressure is going to do the opposite. It's actually going to push fluids out of the capillary, okay? Now if you look on the outside portion, we have interstitial colloid osmotic pressure. Okay, interstitial osmotic pressure, and that's pushing things out. And then we have finally interstitial fluid pressure. That comes from our lymph nodes here, and that has a pressure of about 3 milligrams per mercuries. I can't remember. Anyways, basically, if fluid comes into this space, it's going to get sucked up into the lymphatic system, okay? So, ultimately, this is what controls edema, okay? For the most part, fluid is going to be pushed out, right? There is a net movement of 13 outside of the moving outside of the capillary, and that's what we want, because we'll have cells here that need nutrients coming through the blood and oxygen and such. Okay, now I'm going to just kind of walk you through just a quick scenario. So maybe I'll talk about this one, I'll talk about that one. So just for example, if we had like maybe a burn or a blister on our skin, that's going to affect the cells here. It's actually going to break open the membranes and start expelling things from them. Okay, and when this happens, it's going to start entering into this interstitial fluid space, and that's going to increase the solute concentration and pushing more fluids out. If more fluids exit, okay, great, we have the lymphatic system to suck it all up, but it can only suck up so much, and so the edema will start to occur, and fluid will start to fill the spaces in our body where that damage has occurred. Now again, that's just a super brief example. I want to talk about right-sided heart failure. If right-sided heart failure occurs, then blood will back up, because the heart can't take in all that blood, and so blood is going to be pushed up against that in all the different peripheral vasculature. Increase our venous pressure. Increasing venous pressure will increase the hydrostatic pressure, right? Because it's going to be backed up here, backed up on this side. This is our venous end. So if it's backed up, our HP is actually going to increase, and if HP increases, that means more fluid is going to exit the capillaries. And if more fluid's exiting the capillaries, then edema again will occur into the feet and in the chest. So that's just kind of a quick kind of overview of those basic ideas. Yeah.